Hello, and into another podcast by George. Got a big show today, maybe the biggest. I'm a huge fan of our guest today. Dr. Cornel West is coming on the podcast by George Liveline. We're going to talk about his candidacy and the issues of the day, and they are huge. And I want to do an introduction here for the Liveline. I hope you saw the promo. I'm going to put that graphic up on screen, and I'm going to do the Liveline introduction. A lot of people would say he doesn't need an introduction, but I've talked to people, particularly in this part of the country, that are not that aware of him. So I want to read this, and I just like to do it anyway because this is fantastic, folks. Dr. Cornel West, affectionately known to many as Brother West, is a professor of philosophy and Christian practice at Union Theological Seminary. He has a passion to communicate to a vast variety of public in order to keep alive the legacy of the great Martin Luther King Jr., a legacy of telling the truth and bearing witness to love and justice. God, you got to love that. Dr. West is the former university professor at Harvard University and professor emeritus at Princeton University. Cornel West graduated magna cum laude from Harvard in 3 years and obtained his MA and PhD in philosophy at Princeton. He's the first Black person to receive a PhD in philosophy from Princeton University. He's written 20 books, folks. And Dr. West is, to get this, he's produced 3 music albums on sketches of my culture, street knowledge, and never forget, in collaboration with artists such as Prince, Andre 3000, Jill Scott, and many others. Dr. West also appeared in 2 Matrix movie series as Counselor West. So there you go. There he is. Welcome to Podcast by George, Dr. West.
My dear brother, you blessed me for allowing me to be in conversation with you. I salute you. You're such a force for good in the language of John Coltrane, but it's also true for Sister Mary, your beloved wife, though, man, very much. When I looked at your podcast and I said, the rain in Spain stays main in the plane. By George, she's got it.
Yeah.
By George.
I try mightily, let me tell you.
Learner low, my fair lady, brother.
I wanted to start. I want you to talk about September 11th here to start, because this is when we're doing the recording, but also something that you just mentioned that kind of goes by people very quickly. And it's this music thing. It's this jazz background. And you are kind of a jazz guy. Your life is kind of a fabric woven with jazz, and it's your perspective on life. And a lot of people miss that. It's very important if you understand jazz, the music, and Dr. Cornel West.
Well, you're so very right, though, brother, because I am who I am because somebody loved me, my brothers. I read in Clifton West. My parents, Shiloh Baptist Church, with Willie P. Cook and Deacon Hinton and Sarah Ray. And what does that mean? You start with our humanity at the deepest level. Not so much just color, gender, class, sexual orientation. Those are all parts of our humanity. But at that deepest level has to do with the fears and insecurities and anxieties we have. And you see, music cuts through all of the labels and categories, all of the constructs, and says, what kind of human being are you going to be from your mama's womb to tomb? So in order to be a great musician, you got to come from the soul, the dark corners of the soul, and touch others' soul. Do you think about this, my brother? Can you imagine what American politics would be if it were 1/4 as honest and candid as our music?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Good God, from Louis Armstrong, of course, Iowa's got Beck Beiderbecke, right?
Yeah. Yeah, from Iowa. Yeah, that's got a big Iowa connection with the jazz.
Oh, yes. And he went down to St. Louis and sat at the feet of the great Louis Armstrong. And Louis said, brother, we in it together. I understand that you are committed to this music. They both blowing the same instrument. Of course, Louis is, the genius of geniuses, but Beck's understood very well. And so they didn't have to worry about, a lot of these kind of superficial racial divisions that are tied to so much evil and structures of domination. The human connection was made at the deepest level. Yeah. That's what we need, my brother. That's what we need.
Yeah, that is a fact. Okay, so I got to ask a question because of the day, 9/11. Your thoughts today?
Absolutely. Well, I tell you though, man, you always begin with the suffering. You always begin with the innocent ones. You begin with the deaths that didn't have to be. And I must say, part of it also has to do with just the need for the truth telling. How do we attempt to tell the truth, or in your language, really be truth seekers and truth tellers at the same time about ourselves? The condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak. And that has to do with our relation to the world. I wish that we were a more decent nation among nations, that we don't need to be an empire that asks nations to defer to us, because empires strike back.
Yeah.
And they strike back in very ugly ways, just as the imperial domination can be quite ugly. But in the end, as I began, it's our humanity, it's our human status, and our attempt to try to create communities that respect each other, nations that respect each other. So you don't have to resort to the kind of violence that you get both from 7/11, September 11, but you also know, the September 11 in Chile, 1973. Same kind of violence, imperial violence on the one hand, and then the violence over against the empire on the other, and the innocent people who get caught in the middle.
Yeah, and I know you're a biblical man, obviously, but that's reaping what you sow, and that's what we're talking about here. And of course, our thoughts, all of the victims and sorrow and hardship because of 9/11. That's kind of the backdrop because of the day for the show. But I want to talk about your presidential campaign, and again, biblical. Let's talk David and Goliath a little bit here. You're running as an independent third party, but it really speaks to me because the kind of the subtitle for my show, what I talk about all the time on here, is the podcast by George, Big Three, the big three on the PBG, I call it, and it is climate, war, and healthcare. Those are the three topics that I'm on all the time. And when I look at your homepage on your website, that's what we're talking about.
That's exactly right, though, brother. No, but you've been consistent, though. There's no doubt about it. Anytime you're fundamentally committed to truth telling and truth seeking, then you're going to have to come to terms with that constant phenomenon in human history, which is war. Karl von Clausewitz's great work on war, 1832. He published that after he died. His wife actually published it. And we don't like to talk about it, but it is constant. War has been the midwife of nations. Politics is war by other means. War in so many ways sits at the center of the apocalyptic moments of the species. We have the capacity to blow up the whole species. And that was just with the bombs. We have it prior to nuclear power. Now we've got nuclear power that can blow up the whole species many times over. So there's an intricate connection between the wrestling with the environment to make sure we protect it, and then that war that calls into question the very possibilities of our flourishing and flowering. And then, of course, the healthcare, which really sits so much at the center of domestic policy, how we can be a civilized nation and not allow healthcare to be made available to people without some kind of a money mediation. Good God Almighty. It's a sad affair, but it's an affair that we're still trying to change.
Yeah, and of course, war and the warmongering and the military bases that encircle the globe, they're responsible, the greatest industrial polluter on the planet, all of these greenhouse gases and this climate catastrophe. So much of it is due to the military. Let's talk about the situation in Ukraine, because I was looking at a news release on your website here from just a month or two ago, and you were responding with revulsion, really, at the idea of these cluster bombs going into Ukraine from the United States. But now, since then, depleted uranium shells are going in there. And just this morning, Doctor, it was announced that the Biden administration is sending these long-range missiles into Ukraine. And Russia has already responded to that. And Biden and Antony Blinken are very quick to point out that we don't expect those to be launched into Russia. But man, we're on a high wire. This is getting kind of hairy, really.
Oh, you're so right, though, man. We're at a moment now where on the one hand, you've got Biden pushing us toward World War III. Yeah. You've got Trump pushing us toward the second Civil War at home. And you're absolutely right. The militarism that is just aggressive under the Biden administration. I thank God that you're on top of it, keeping us informed about it. But we just cannot deny the expansion of NATO being a provocation. As criminal as an invasion of that was, and I'm no friend of Putin's whatsoever. I've got strong indictments of Putin. At the same time, you've got a wounded empire, which is what Russia is, the Russian Federation is. It's a wounded empire, an economy roughly the size of Italy, but still has a grandiose conception of itself. But no empire would allow for a 2,000-kilometer border to sit there with their major foe with missiles pointed toward it. If the United States had those missiles in Mexico or Canada, then we'd understand what it's like to be in those shoes. And we know what the US government would do with the State Department and the Pentagon if Russia or China had missiles in Toronto or Mexico City or Cuba. Oh, we'd blow them to smithereens.
Yes.
We just have to be honest. That's how empires behave. Now, I'm not a rationalizer or defenders of empire. I'm an anti-imperialist all the way down. So I'm anti-imperialist of the mightiest empire in the history of the species, which is the American empire. I'm an anti-imperialist with Russian imperialism, which is much lesser, but it's still wrong. I'm an anti-imperialist if you drop me off around the time of Jesus in the Roman Empire.
Well, okay, so let me ask you this, because a lot of people say, well, what would Cornel West do if he were elected president? Well, number one, those weapons deliveries would stop, I would think. And also the money for that would stop. And then lastly, the thing that I want, maybe the most right now, is that Antony Blinken would be stopped from running around the globe selling weapons, and he would be sitting down with whoever would sit down with him to try to get this thing settled. I mean, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. We need the stop of the war. We need diplomatic processes, just and fair, but diplomatic processes. But we also need a vision in Washington that views the United States as a decent, dignified nation among nations rather than an empire obsessed with total dominant spectrum, and other nations have to always defer to or listen to the dictates of the empire. And NATO and IMF and others are mediating agents for American hegemony, for American power around the world. So here I come along, jazz man that I am, blues man that I am, and says I want to be the face of the American empire in order to dismantle the empire, in order to shift all of those resources from military spending, 57 cents for every dollar, into quality schools, free tuition, jobs with a living wage, deep solidarity I have with the militant wing of the trade union partner, the trade union movement, that really pushing for a living wage to make sure our workers are treated with dignity. I want quality housing. I want to abolish homelessness. And I come out of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer and Dorothy Day and Michael Harrington and others calling for the abolishment of poverty.
That's a Christian thing to do, and we can afford it too.
We can afford it, absolutely. We've already spent over $140 billion on war.
Yes,
we spent $1 trillion in Afghanistan. We've got the resources if we have the right priorities.
Yes.
Now, Martin King used to say we got warped priorities. He called for a revolution. Well, what is a revolution? A revolution is the sharing of wealth. It is the sharing of resources. It is the sharing of dignity. It is mediated with democratic processes. But it is revolution. Why? Because we have experienced massive redistribution of wealth from poor and working people to the 1% in the last 50 years.
Yes. Beautiful.
That is redistribution, but that's redistribution upward. We need redistribution downward. Now, of course, when you start talking about downward, they call you a communist, a traitor, and so forth. You say, well, I am anti-injustice. That's not anti-American. I want to reintroduce America to the best of itself. And the best of America is, in fact, those Americans of all colors and genders and sexual orientations and religious or non-religious identities who said, we want empowerment of poor and working people at the center of our conception of ourselves.
Yeah.
And we got a rich tradition, my brother.
Yeah, and we got to do it now, because I tell people we're living in a 2020 world. 20 minutes, we could be dead from a nuclear strike, accidentally or on purpose. In 20 years, it looks to me like, Doctor, we're all going to be in big trouble because of climate. That's the 2020 part of this. And you talk about the economic injustice in the United States. I just saw something that said 3 multi-billionaires own more wealth than the 90% of America right now. 3 of them. I mean, that's a system that's broken, that needs to be repaired at the very least, or reinvented or something. And that's what gets me excited about your candidacy. And the time with Dr. West is limited, obviously. I got to move this thing along very quickly and come to a close.
You take your time. We going with the spirit. We going with the spirit, brother. You take your time. Man.
I want to ask you about another guest that I have had on my show that I just love, Medea Benjamin and the folks at Code Pink. You've got an event coming up with them October 3rd in Washington, D.C. It's a teach-in. Talk a little bit about Code Pink and maybe something about this event that's coming up.
Yeah, well, what we need now is the escalation of a major wave of activists to help create an anti-war movement. Because, see, in the end, given what's going on in Washington with the hemorrhaging that's taking place, the ways in which the lobbies and the big donors and big benefactors have bought off so many of our politicians, we have to bring pressure to bear from below. And it has to be done with integrity. It has to be done with honesty. This is very important because there's a spiritual dimension here. It's not about hatred and revenge. See, this is about justice. Justice is what love looks like in public. Integrity is about transcending the kind of hatred that we see characterized in the polarization and gangsterization of the country and the culture. So we need an anti-war movement. Now, my dear sister Medea, I can go on and on about her. I have great love for her, just like, my dear brother Chris Hedges or John Baraka, or a whole host of others, that they've been talking about peace for a long time. But the peace movement has not been as center as it ought. Because anytime you talk about peace, you got to talk about critiques of empire. You got to talk about critiques of organized greed and predatory capitalist processes. You got to talk about critiques of white supremacy. I was just in Mississippi with my 2 dear brothers, Parker and Jenkins, with the police shooting that bullet right through his tongue and his neck, and he still lived, and all the families there with all of their dignity. You see, that kind of militaristic response. The militarism at home has something to do with the militarism abroad. And we've got to get an accountability of any form of militarism. Well, that's talk about peace too. Same is true in terms of male supremacy, domestic violence, and the mistreatment of our precious sisters of all colors. They need peace in the home, peace in the family, peace in the community, peace in the workplace. But as Brother Martin reminds us, peace is not the absence of tensions. Peace is the presence of justice.
Oh, that's great. You mentioned Chris. You mentioned Chris Hedges. He's a hero of mine. I can't let it go by without mentioning just a little. And I pay attention. Here, I tell people, go to the best source for this stuff. Go to Chris Hedges, go to his Substack, and look and see what he says about Dr. West. I mean, this is an endorsement you can take to the bank, folks. Okay, so that's what the great Chris Hedges has to say. This guy's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He's somebody that's been a war correspondent. He's chronicled America in his great books. I mean, he has a grave, profound understanding and love for this country. He wants it to be done right. He wants it to be fixed. And he's saying, look at Dr. Cornel West. All right, now, before we let you go, Doc, I got to ask you, because I am a part of this patchwork quilt of left-wing media out here, a small part of it. And a lot of it's been a buzz here the past week because of your appearance on the Jimmy Dore show. Now, I don't want to, spend a lot of time on that, but here's what I wanted to get at to get your thinking and see if it agrees with my thinking. Now, Jimmy, I get what he's kind of getting at. He wants you to win. I think he really does, the presidential campaign. He's thinking you need to get the most of the half of America that doesn't vote almost. So he wants to go broad. He doesn't want you to focus on these narrow issues that won't get you this broad part of the electorate. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, maybe I'm a realist. Are you going to win? I hope so. Man, my wife hopes so. I mean, we got our fingers and toes crossed here in Iowa. But if you don't, if you can just get a few percentage points of the electorate to follow you, to do what you want them to do, like your brother Bernie did, as you call him, and it comes time for the election and you tell Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, for instance, look, give us one thing. We haven't been getting anything on climate, war, and healthcare, or Julian Assange. Also, don't forget about him. Give us one thing, and I will give you or release my voters to do whatever they want to, and they might be persuaded to vote for you if you do this one thing. And, I'm talking about things like peace talks in Ukraine, Medicare for all for the natural disaster victims, including in East Palestine, Ohio. Maybe some reform in the marijuana laws as an example, but something like that. We want to win one. Give us one thing in exchange for the support that I have. Is that craziness on my part, or is there a possibility that could happen?
Oh, no, I appreciate that question, though, brother. But no, I think that for me, this campaign is a crucial moment in a larger movement for poor and working people here and abroad. In any instance of just negotiation with a Biden or anybody else that would take away the fire of that movement, you see, I would never do that. We need alternative institutions, alternative infrastructures, alternative movements, alternative visions in order to fight de-escalating fascism. And to take one issue and allow Biden to take that issue and steal the thunder from the movement. Oh, no, I would never do that. That's like asking the jazz musician to join a military band and play just and ask the military band, would you play a few blue notes? Just play a few blue notes, maybe in the third section of the song. No. We want the whole band to be jazz because it's coming from below. Now, it's true that politics can be Machiavellian. Politics is issue by issue, but no, movements are very different. And this is a movement-driven campaign. You know what I mean? This is a movement-driven a project in that regard. And that's another reason why I really do like my dear brother Chris. We've taught at Broadway, other prisons for many, many, many years. And we talk about the ways in which these things are connected. That's what I love about By George. You understand the role of war's connection to climate, role of climate connection to domestic issues. You understand what Martin Luther King Jr. means when he says those bombs that were dropped in Vietnam landed in ghettos, and landed in reservations, and landed in barrios, and landed in poor white communities in Iowa, and Kentucky, and West Virginia. It is not just a matter of a calculus between guns and butter, but it's mental, it's spiritual. You militarize abroad, you militarize at home. You go to some of these schools, what do you see? More policemen than you have nurses and counselors. And that's a militarizing culture inside of our precious schools with our priceless children. And then we wonder why we got gun problems. We wonder why the suicide rates are escalating. That level of spiritual decay and cultural decadence that loses sight of the precious humanity of each and every one of us. That's in part what this movement's about, my brother.
Yeah, and as the great Chris Hedges says, we got to start somewhere, and we're late. Let's get started. Let's get going. Let's get this movement. True. Yeah.
But I love your 2020 formulation. I've never heard that. I love that.
Yeah, it's a 2020 world, doctor. It really
2020 world. Yeah.
We got to act. Okay, I'm going to let you go. I know you got a lot of other commitments, but I want to give you the last word, obviously, because you deserve it. And good on you for doing this, because this ain't easy. This is time consuming. This is hard work. You've spent your whole life devoted to this. Give us a wrap up here, and we'll send you on your way here for Podcast by George.
Well, I would say this, that when I think of persons like yourself, Brother George, and your beloved wife, Sister Mary, I think of persons who, in the midst of all of the grimness and the dimness, still hold up their heads with a level of dignity that's concerned about those sly stone called everyday people. And you see, that's what
Yeah.
hope is. That's what hope is. It's a verb as well as a virtue. You got to be in motion. You got to be raising your voice. The anthem of Black people is what? Lift every voice, not lift every echo. You see, Mary and George are not echoes, they voices. They like blues men and jazz
Yeah.
women. Find their voice. When you find your voice, you find it with other voices. Next thing you know, there's a whole host of others in motion. Ooh, we might have some momentum and a movement here. Lo and behold, it spills over into electoral politics. Spills over electoral politics. What happens? A lot of people get exposed. Ooh, you're talking a pretty language, but we see you're so tied to Wall Street. You're so tied to the Pentagon. You're so tied to these lobbyists. You give these nice speeches on Monday. When it's time to vote, you're still very much in the back pocket of the corporate elite. That's the Democratic Party. At its center, corporate power. Republican Party at its center, corporate power. We need a third way. We need an alternative way, but we do it with a sense of humility. And that's very important because I don't believe that any of us as human beings have a monopoly on truth, goodness, beauty, or even holy. I speak also as a Christian. You know what I mean? We are cracked vessels, brother. We just trying to love our crooked neighbor with our crooked hearts. That's a high standard, because if you love them, then you're going to fight vigorously and vigilantly if they're treated unfairly and unjustly. That's my tradition. And we do it with a smile. We do it with a smile, the same smile you got. And we do it with style. I like that brim, like that hat you got on there, brother. I'm telling you, keep your style. Keep your style.
Yeah, and I'm kind of a curmudgeon, and I fancy myself a journalist, but it's obvious I'm a huge fan of your folks. So I mean, I'm loving every minute. This is a highlight. This is a big moment for me, and my wife is going to love the kind words from Dr. Cornel West. Dr. West, thanks so much for coming on Podcast by George and this live line.
No, salute you. Love you both. Love you both. Stay strong, though, brother.
And folks, if you like Podcast by George, if you like seeing Dr. West, if you like these kind of interviews that you see on my show, please go to my Facebook page or YouTube, or better yet, the easiest way is just go to podcastbygeorge.com, podcastbygeorge.com. You can sign up for Facebook, YouTube, the iHeartRadio app, iTunes is another popular one, Spotify, all of those places. They can be found there. Make it easy on yourself. But thanks again for watching this particular edition. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.